Alrighty folks, let's get started with the very simple base for this model. Now, for those of you who haven't seen my channel before, I have done quite a few of these Abe 3D designs, and I love them because the base is simplistic and the models are absolutely beautiful and very well put together. They fit like a glove and they're just beautiful for what we want to do with them, and that is paint them. And specifically, we want to spend time painting our figure and not just our base. So as you can see here, this base was a couple different pieces. It's printed in 1/4 scale, so it's very large. And all I did was dry brush white over an off-white primer that I had put down because the detailing was already perfect by the original artist. Now, the cape that she's wearing, again, I primered in an off-white, and I wanted to add in different shades of white. And that's one of the biggest challenges if you're ever painting a white character, is you don't want it to look just flat white because it's very boring and it's very hard to create contrast with white without just completely making it gray and without, again, just making it flat white. It's kind of like, where's that balance, right? You want it to look white, and you have to use a very light grayscale. So what I did here was I used cold gray as like my base color, right? Because think about how I typically paint is I create my base coat, then I add my shadow coat, and then I add in my highlights. So my base coat is cold gray. I'm using this color Holy White for my shadows, which is actually a very light gray. It looks dark here, but I promise you it's a very light gray speed paint from Army Painter. It's a great shade color for white because it is a very light gray. And that's perfect for these shadows, as I mentioned before. So all I'm doing is I'm applying this speed paint via an airbrush into all these shadowed areas or places where a shadow would form, like under her neck, under her chest, at her sides, in the crook of her back, and also in between her legs and around her rear end, where there's going to be shadows. That's where we're spraying the speed paint, and I'm spraying it right out of an airbrush. Now, the airbrush I'm using is a Harder & Steenbeck Evolution AL, in this case, with a 0.2 millimeter needle and nozzle, and I'm spraying at about 20 psi. Now, what you see me doing here is, after I've added the shadows in a few areas, I'm also going back and adding in white highlights or covering things up in gray. So if you go a little heavy-handed on the shadows, you can always go back to your base color and just clean up those shadows a little bit. Typically what I end up doing is, as you see here, I just go back over it with the highlights, and typically the highlight coat covers up any overspray with shadows and whatnot and gives us the look we want. And here you can see what that arm looks like when we add in the highlights. So going back to the leg now, here you can see I'm putting in the shadows. So I'm using that Holy White in the shadowed areas. Now this leg is very big, and I don't want to go too crazy with the shadows. Usually I would just do a reverse zenithal with a darker tone, but because this is white, I don't want it to look too dark. I just want there to be shadows in those folds. So you can see what I did was individually sprayed each fold, and then what I'm doing is just taking white, which is just flat white, so the lightest white we can get, which is just white. We're spraying that like a zenithal from above. I want to take a moment to say thank you to my patrons that support my work. If you're interested in some exclusive content, including daily vlogs and how-to videos, so you can get better at this hobby, or perhaps you are ready to take the next step and turn your hobby and passion into a side gig and earn some extra cash, head on over to my Patreon, where you can get exclusive access to extra content. Now, after I have my base coat, shadows, and highlights, I'm going into some detail painting on this leg specifically. And I just took some gunmetal from the Adams metallic range, and I put that on the little zipper that's there. That's really the only details on those boots. And as I was mentioning, I was spraying the white from above to create a highlight effect using white. And that worked really well over top of that cold gray. Now what I did here with her fur was I had it like a gray color, and then I dry brushed it with white. Same exact thing. If we take a darker base color and then dry brush on, it's just like creating a highlight. And what that does is it gives us some contrast and makes it look like there's some volume there, which really isn't there. Now with this gem here, I just painted silver, then Citadel red, and then covered it with gloss clear coat. That's very, very important. I call it my gem method. I've used it for quite a few models, It just is a great way to make something look like it's made out of clear resin, even if it's not. The next step here is painting the skin tones, and I can see here, or you can see here, that I've already primed it in white. I taped everything off that I had painted earlier, and I'm spraying it with pink. Or in this case, I think it's actually Atom Fuchsia. So it's Atom by Ammo. It's their fuchsia color. I have it available on my store if you're interested. I have all these colors available on my store. But this is just a pink color. Pick any pink color you want. It needs to be a bright pink color though for this to work. And you're going to cover the entire model, the entire skinned part of the model, in the pink. Now the next step is to take this carmine, or like a dark red, and you're going to go in all the shadowed areas. This is going to create contrast, and it's called pre-shading, because we're shading before we're actually painting the model. And we want to put the dark red in all of the shadowed areas, same thing as before, in between her chest, underneath her arms, anywhere where we want to cast a shadow and create some contrast. Because these models, even at 1/4 scale, they're still smaller than a life-size scale, and we want to make sure that we create contrast, because contrast is what tricks our eyes into thinking that these things are real, and they're the thing that really blows away the audience when they see them. So after we have our pink and red pre-shading done, we're going to move on to our base skin tone. And you can see here I'm using Warm Skin. I'm using all of the Atom range because I absolutely love these paints. They spray like lacquers, but they're an acrylic paint. I absolutely love them. They go down beautifully. You can see how nice and smooth of a finish we're getting. And that's just a light coat of the Warm Skin to start. You can just see we're getting a nice even light coat to start. We're not overly saturating the surface. We're not flooding it, because if you flood the surface, you're going to get pooling, and it's going to create a really bad finish for you. So just go lightly. You can see I'm using still that same 0.2 millimeter needle and nozzle. A lot of times I use a 0.3, so don't worry if you have a 0.3 millimeter needle and nozzle. It's perfectly fine. Just keep using that. It's a great all-rounder, especially for models of this size. We're not really worried about details too much quite yet. So as you can see, I'm just spraying all of those areas with a light coat of the Warm Skin. Now, some folks like to leave some of the red and the pink exposed in certain situations, and that's fine. I've seen plenty of artists do that. I don't like to leave too much of that exposed. The red in the shadows is not as bad, because that does kind of look natural in some areas. So that's why it's so important to spray the red, because if you happen to not get some of the shadowed areas, they'll just show as dark red, and then it'll actually look okay. If you leave those shadowed areas in a bright pink, it'll stand out like a sore thumb. So just be aware of that. Now, this next step is following the same process as I mentioned earlier when I was talking about the light gray tones. We did the Warm Skin. Now we're doing what I call the shadow tone, which is beige pink. Now, for those of you who have seen my Poison Ivy video, this differs a little bit from there, because I'm not using that dark nude pink. I'm just using beige pink. And I found that this is kind of my standard from here on out, because I've really enjoyed this process. This beige pink, we're spraying in every area that we had sprayed red earlier. So it's really adding even more contrast to even the base coat that we had put in over top of the red and pink. You can see, again, I have everything masked off that I painted earlier, and masking can be really tricky, so don't be upset if you get a little bit of bleed through. It's very easy to fix that. The last step here is to use light skin only from the top. So it's almost like a zenithal highlight, okay? For those of you that don't know what a zenithal highlight, it's where you spray a very light color from the top, which is called the zenith, which is like an overhead light. And what I'm doing is I'm using the light skin to create the highlights, again, just from above. And that's adding another layer. That's our highlight layer. So what we have here is 3 layers of post shading on top of 2 layers of pre-shading. So technically speaking, there's about 5 different shades, if not more, of skin tones. And when you have that level of contrast throughout your entire model, it really looks real, and your observers are really going to like the way it looks. It's just a nice, pleasing look. Now with the skin tones out of the way, we can work on the hair. And blonde hair can be really tricky, and I see a lot of people just paint the hair yellow and call it a day, and it's not really a good trick. Although I can tell you that I've struggled trying to get it just right. Back on my magic video I started with a brown base, and that seems to be my favorite nowadays. Although when I was making this I tried something a little different, which is to use Dunkelgelb, which is a dark yellow, as a base, and then try using a light yellow on top. And I'm satisfied with this result, but you might not like it, and that's okay. But let's talk about what you can do with a model like this. If you want to paint your own model, I have them available on my store. I have over 600 designs available as of this recording that you can choose from if you want to paint one yourself. And if you'd like to have me paint it for you, I'd be happy to work with you as well to do a commission painting. I also have plenty of paints and other materials available, way more than what I'm showing here. I've stocked up my store so much. Use code STORMYT2024 at checkout to give yourself a nice discount. Again, that's relentlesstourmodels.com. You can also check out my portfolio, which has dozens upon dozens of models that I've done in it. You can use them for inspiration. You can use them to check out my work. Go ahead and check that out if you're interested in creating your own models, or maybe just adding another piece to your collection. Now, with the skin tones out of the way and her clothing all painted, we can work on her portrait. Now, portraits tend to be the most, let's say, difficult thing to learn as a new painter, because it's a lot of details in a very small area. And I will say, if you're new to this, 1/4 scale might seem daunting, and it is from the standpoint of doing like the blending and stuff with the airbrush. If you're very new to airbrushing, it can be very difficult, but it's a good practice to blend on 1/4 scale. But when it comes to painting portraits, there's no better scale to paint portraits at, because the bigger it is, the easier it is to kind of learn the details and, you know, learn the process. So 1/4 scale faces are a lot of fun. They really are, because it's not so difficult as it is on the smaller scales. So what you can see I did is I just painted her lips using a nice red color. And I have to point out, in case anyone noticed it in the beginning when you saw what she looks like, that her eyes are going to be brown and her lips are a very specific color of red. Now in the comics, sometimes her eyes were always blue, but sometimes her lips were blue as well. But I had a client in this case who wanted me to actually mirror his girlfriend, who was wearing this outfit, and she had brown eyes and very red lipstick. So I actually matched that for the client. So if you notice that her eyes are not matching the comic book character, it's because I was actually doing a custom piece for a client where her eyes were brown. So I just want to get that out of the way in case anyone was curious why I made that decision. So you can see here her eyebrows, I made them brown, and then her eyelashes are a nice black. And again, this is a nice detail from Abe 3D. His faces are almost always the same in all the characters, and he actually does just such a phenomenal job with the details around the eyes, especially for these female characters, which is all he does. It's just absolutely beautiful, and it gives you, again, great practice, because all the details are there. Everything is raised up, and there's a nice edge, which makes it so much easier for a painter to paint. And even the eyes, there's a flat spot where the irises go and where the pupils go, which make it a lot easier. You don't have to guess or anything like that. So after I have all the black details down around the eyelashes and around the bottom of the eye, I'm painting in the white part. Now I use an ivory color here, is what I use. It's a pro acrylic color. And then I take a pink color from Adam, and I actually just touch in the insides of the eyes to almost get like the fleshy part, and then I go back over it with white to clear it up. And then I paint in the entire iris with black to make sure I have the shape right. And once I have her shape right, I'm going to use typically 2 to 3 colors to paint in her iris. So in this case, I'm going to start with like a dark brown around the top, and then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, as we go down the eye, we're going to add in a lighter brown. You can see here if you're looking at a picture of an eyeball, it's always lighter on the bottom because you have an overhead light, and that's where the light's going to shine off. And it always has more of a lighter color along the bottom of the iris than at the top, if you look up any kind of references images for an eye. So you can see what I did there was a dark brown on top, light brown on the bottom, and sometimes I do an extra little piece of light on the bottom, but then the last step there was to put a gloss coat over it, okay, and then let that dry, and then take a little bit of just white and put it on the side of the pupil, and it makes it look like the reflection in her eye. Really easy process and a beautiful finish for a nice model. And there's that hair all finished. There's a little bit of contrast to the hair, not too much, so it didn't look out like a toy, which is what I wanted it to not look like. I got a little bit of contrast, but this thing again fits together like a glove, and I just absolutely love how this one finished off for my customer. It's absolutely beautiful piece, and it again just goes together like a glove. These designs from Abe 3D are available over on Patreon if you want them. You're more than welcome to go try them out, check him out. He has tons just like this. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you guys like this. If you did, please like the video. Subscribe if you want to see more content like this, because I've done over 70 models in the last 6 months, so I have plenty of content recorded coming your way. If you want more timely updates and content though, go check out my Patreon at Relentless Storm. Hope you guys come back here soon for more modeling